Okay, so welcome everybody. I'm Dr. Ben Weitz, and this is the Functional Medicine Discussion Group. And thank you for joining us tonight. I hope you'll consider coming to some of our future events. Irritable bowel syndrome is the most commonly diagnosed disorder of the gastrointestinal tract and accounts for, it occurs in up to 20% of patients of the population in the United States. It accounts for about 30% of referrals to gastroenterologists. Irritable bowel syndrome is a condition marked by abdominal pain, gas, bloating, urgency, diarrhea, constipation, sometimes both. And when patients with IBS undergo a colonoscopy, there's no significant findings, unlike patients with inflammatory bowel disease. For many years, IBS was seen as a condition arising from psychological stress until Dr. Pimentel discovered that an overgrowth of bacteria from the colon into the small intestine was a causative agent in the overwhelming number of cases of IBS. However, this has not been easily accepted by the medical profession, and a lot of the professions still have not fully accepted that bacterial overgrowth is the cause of IBS. In fact, I went to the Mayo Clinic website, and they are describing IBS as a functional disorder whose cause is not understood, and it's a condition that can't be cured. They say that lab tests are only rarely needed, and that treatment is only to control symptoms like diarrhea and constipation. As you may already know, and this is a true fact, it takes approximately 17 years for a new idea in medicine to be accepted into common practice. So now I'd like to introduce Dr. Mark Pimentel, our special guest this evening. Dr. Pimentel is the world's leading expert on small intestinal bacterial overgrowth and its link with IBS. Dr. Pimentel has published over 150 papers and a book entitled A New IBS Solution: Bacteria, the Missing Link in Treating Irritable Bowel Syndrome. His research has been focused on the association between food poisoning and disruption of gut flora, impairment of GI tract motility, and small bacterial overgrowth in the pathophysiology of irritable bowel syndrome. Dr. Pimentel is responsible for at least the following breakthroughs in research on IBS. Number one, that SIBO is the cause of IBS in the majority of cases. That IBS often follows food poisoning and through an autoimmune mechanism. So the bacteria that cause food poisoning, like Campylobacter jejuni, produce cytolethal distending toxin, which sets off an immune reaction that results in antibodies to vinculin. And this autoimmune reaction often damages the migrating motor complex, which controls GI motility. Dr. Pimentel also developed a blood test for cytolethal distending toxin and vinculin antibodies. So it's a blood test for IBS. He also popularized the use of the lactulose hydrogen methane breath testing as a way to diagnose SIBO. He got rifaximin approved for the treatment of SIBO, and he's working on a breath test for hydrogen sulfide gas, I'm sure among other things. Dr. Pimentel is the director of the GI Motility Center at Cedars, and he's a professor of medicine at the UCLA School of Medicine. On behalf of the functional medicine community, I would like to thank you, Dr. Pimentel, for getting the gastroenterological profession to start giving more respect to the importance of food in GI conditions. And thank you for joining us tonight. Thanks.
It's a pleasure to be here. So I guess we had two options. I could give you a presentation to bore you to tears, or we could do this as a Q&A, and I think you look at a Q&A, and so
Yeah,
I'm happy
I thought that'd
to
be interesting.
do that way.
Yeah, so I want everybody to be able to get involved and feel free to speak up. So, Dr. Pimentel, maybe you can tell us how you got started with a clinical focus on IBS.
So as you mentioned, and thank you for the eloquent introduction, because it summarizes a lot of my career, and it's interesting to hear it from you. But in the beginning, when we started looking at irritable bowel syndrome, everybody was focused on putting Band-Aids on the symptoms. So if you had diarrhea, let's stop the diarrhea, give Imodium. If you have constipation, let's give a laxative. And that's even the approach, as you said, on certain web pages still today, that just treat the symptoms. And I kind of joke with audiences and I say, well, it's kind of like you have cancer, let's give you morphine, you won't feel it. I mean, well, you got to treat the cause, you got to
Right.
try and find the root, otherwise the patients won't get better. And you also get side effects from all these different medications that were being given at the time. But basically I was finding that patients were not satisfied with that approach, and they were complaining about bloating as the big feature. And you don't get bloated if you don't produce gas. I mean, gas is the source of bloating, and what's the source of gas? It's what's bacteria, and that was kind of the nidus of thinking in 1996 when we started to really put this together. First paper was in 1999.
Great. So how would you define SIBO?
That's changing a little bit, so we could touch on some of the aspects of that. But small intestinal bacterial overgrowth is where you're having too many bacteria in a place they don't belong. And the small bowel of humans doesn't have much bacteria in general. And we went and reviewed all the studies all the way back to the 1960s, culturing the small bowel of a normal human, and there's hardly anything there, because we have great mechanisms for digesting food. So bacterial overgrowth, by the definition, is that there's too much bacteria in a place they don't belong. Now, in the methane story, we're now contrasting that and saying that when methanogens are too much, they're not actually too much in the small bowel, but too much everywhere, and we're calling that a bloom now. So they're overabundant, even in places where they do belong. And so that's slightly different definition and not quite the overgrowth, the traditional overgrowth we've been talking about for years.
Interesting. So the treatments that you give for methanogens, would they also affect the methanogens that are in, is it in the colon? Is it?
Right,
as
so
well?
I think this audience is, you don't have to teach this audience that balance of flora and balance of things in the body are critically important, and I think in the stool, a balance is good.
Right.
And the methanogens are part of they're not a bacteria, they're
Right.
part of another group of organisms called archaea, and you have to have a little bit of them, but when they're so much that they're causing trouble, that's an imbalance, and we try and correct that.
Is everybody familiar with the lactulose hydrogen methane breath testing? How many people treat IBS and SIBO and use that test in their practice?
So,
Okay, good. So, when you explain in your papers, you've explained how food poisoning leads to SIBO. So essentially, we're now seeing IBS as an autoimmune condition.
right, that's the new and exciting thing. I mean, new and exciting for the medical community and your community, but we've been working on it for about a decade to get to this point. It took a long time to figure out the pieces. Kind of a story that I have told a number of times, but not to this audience, is I was trying to figure out how bacterial overgrowth occurs. So one of the ways it can occur is if you have a blockage of your bowel, if you've had previous surgery, a tubal ligation, an appendectomy, and there's scar tissue, you can get a kink or a bend in the bowel, and the bowel doesn't drain. You can get overgrowth from that because the bowel is not draining. So it's like a stagnant, anytime a river is stagnant, it gets bacterial buildup, same thing with the small bowel. But these patients with IBS, they didn't have any of that. They didn't have stagnation, at least not mechanical stagnation, but they had a motility problem, a lack of those migrating motor complexes. So while we were doing all the work on bacterial overgrowth, there was groups in Britain saying that food poisoning was triggering IBS. They too were dismissed because in the US, where the main driving force for research was saying, oh, it's psychological, no, it's stress, no, it's this, no, it's that. I'm going to take a tangent because it's kind of a funny joke that I
Yeah.
tell. I gotta be funny sometimes,
Yeah.
otherwise you guys would be bored. So, 10,000 years ago, if you were running through the jungle being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, would now be the time to have a bowel movement? No. Stress is not the cause of IBS, because those people were, Darwin took care of them. So it doesn't make sense fully. Now, does stress affect physiology? Absolutely. I think we all recognize stress affects physiology in many different ways, including motility. But IBS, it's not the case. So now I went off on that tangent. But back to, kind of food poisoning connection. We started to see that idea that food poisoning is causing something. We were saying bacterial overgrowth. How do you put the two together? Around 2003, I ordered a textbook on toxins because I wanted to figure out if it was a toxin that was causing this. So I get this big book, and I open the book, and in the front page of the book is from the Department of Homeland Security, and it says, "We see that you have bought a book on toxins, and you are Canadian," or something like that. But because that was around the time of the anthrax scare, and so here's this Canadian guy in Los Angeles buying this book about this thick on bacterial toxins.
Yeah.
It's a little suspicious. I would say I'm suspicious. But anyway, but from that book, I looked at all the toxins in there, and I was able to recognize that one toxin is common to all the food poisoning bugs that cause IBS. And that's a long answer to your question. But that's where we found the CDTB toxin.
Right. And that's something you measure as part of your blood test.
Right. So exposure to Campylobacter in animal models, we were able to create bacterial overgrowth just from doing that. And that started the spark of this idea that the toxin is causing something. But we thought it was direct toxicity. We thought you get the toxin, it wipes out the nerves. The problem is it wipes out these nerves that are really great at coming back. These nerves that create the migrating motor complex, they multiply. They're not like nerves in your arm where they stay there for your life. They're constantly turning over, repopulating. And we said, well, if you damage them, they should come back. And they don't come back. And through extensive study, getting stem cells for memory and all this, we finally figured out that it was vinculin, that it was, so this toxin looks like vinculin. And so it creates an antibody to CDTB, and that cross-reacts with your own immune, through your own immune system.
So molecular mimicry.
Molecular mimicry. And we know that happens a lot in medicine.
What was the name of the common toxin that you found?
CDTB, or cytolethal distending toxin B. Very long name. I would have preferred if it was a shorter name, but.
So how does it affect the vinculin? How does the vinculin involve?
So vinculin's important in how nerves reach out to each other and grab onto each other. So it's kind of like if vinculin doesn't work, it's like the wire is almost at the light, but not quite there, so the light doesn't turn on. So the wires aren't quite connected, and that's what we see under the microscope in these animals, as well as now humans with IBS.
And can you explain exactly, for those of us who aren't quite as familiar, what is the migrating motor complex?
So you wake up in the morning, you haven't eaten breakfast, you go to work, you still haven't eaten breakfast, and you heard that gurgling sound in your stomach, and you're like, I hope my patients don't hear me. Don't turn it off. That's normal. Every 90 minutes, that gurgling sound will go on for 10 minutes. It's like your dishwasher. It starts in the stomach, washes the small bowel, moves all the way down, very high intensity contractions, that's why it's so loud, and then it stops. And then 90 minutes later, it comes back. That's the migrating motor complex. So when you eat a piece of lettuce, humans are not cows, we can't digest most of the piece of lettuce. So that lettuce can't sit on the absorbing surface of your small bowel. You gotta clean it up. So if you don't have the migrating motor complex, it's kind of like eating on a dish, putting the dish in the sink, picking it out of the sink, eating on that dish again without washing it. And that's what we think is going on for overgrowth.
And so then part of your treatment, and you've mentioned in some of your writings that one of the biggest issue with IBS is that you treat it, or the SIBO, you treat it, and then it recurs.
Right. So that was the thing we saw right away. We were giving all sorts of antibiotics back in 2000. And then, the bugs would get resistant to it, and that was a problem, so we really had to come up with something better. Rifaximin finally came out, but
And rifaximin is a special kind of antibiotic.
yeah, and we'll get to that presumably at some point. But we were treating it, and it would come back. Even if patients got 90% better, it would come back after 3 months, 6 months, depends on the patient. And that's when we started to study the motility and realized this cleaning wave was not happening, or happening in 50% of IBS patients. Even after 6 hours, we didn't see one cleaning wave, and that was published in a paper in 2003. So we knew that was what was going on, that this cleaning wave. So we can make the cleaning wave work with medications, prokinetic drugs. And the way that you think of that is that the nerve cells that make the cleaning wave are broken and less intertwined. So I tell my patients, they say, well, how does prokinetic work if the nerves are not there? I said, well, they're there, but they're not all interconnected. So it's like you're walking into your house and half the light bulbs are taken out. So how do you make the house brighter as you're walking in at night? Well, you can put new light bulbs in. Well, we don't know how to do that yet. Or you turn the electricity up in the house so the light bulbs shine brighter. And that's what we do with a prokinetic drug. We whatever connections are there, we're ramping up the electricity through them so that you will get the cleaning wave and we can delay the return of the overgrowth.
In a lot of the literature that discusses motility, there seems to be some confusion between when they're talking about this migrating motor complex and when they're just talking about the postprandial movement of food through the intestines.
Right.
And that's a separate process, right?
Yeah, so
Or is
even in motility circles, doctors who do movements of the gut like I do, they sometimes don't even recognize this officially, is that if you give a drug that makes the gut move, let's say Reglan, familiar with Reglan? I don't like that drug, but it's a drug that makes the gut move.
In our circle, we might use magnesium, say.
Sure, something prokinetic. If you give something that makes the gut move during food, it will make the mechanisms of food digestion faster and stronger. So the gut is like, it's like a light switch, and there's only 2 toggles, eating mode or cleaning mode. The migrating motor complex occurs in cleaning mode, and eating mode is a different mode where things are moving and digesting and moving around. The colon's making room, so it moves everything over a segment, and that's called the colonic mass movement. So if you take a prokinetic when you're eating, you make all that eating mode stuff bigger. If you take a prokinetic when you're not eating, you just make more migrating motor complexes. So, for example, we got into this back in 2007. People were saying, are you giving Zelnorm? Do you remember, anybody know Zelnorm? It was a prokinetic drug that went off the market, but in 2007 we had it, and they said, that's a drug for constipation. I said, no, but I give it at night for the cleaning waves. You never get diarrhea, because you give it during the fasting state, you only augment the fasting muscular function.
So that toxin, it affects the migrating motor complex. Are those the same nerves that control postprandial motility?
No, there's multiple layers of nerves, but the ones that were most targeted by the toxin and the autoimmunity
Right.
were the special layer of these cells that are driving the migrating motor complex. So it picks off those cells specifically as a result, and then you don't get much migrating motor complexes, and then the river is stagnant. And by being stagnant, you get a buildup of bacteria, and that's how bacterial overgrowth occurs. Now, I've made it very simple, but that's 20 years of work
Right.
to get to this point. So it's a lot of research.
Did you
So-
read? Go ahead.
So this paralysis or this lack of connection in this neurologic system has to be fed from a higher functioning system. Where is it through? Is it vagal stimulation? Is it sympathetic or parasympathetic? Where is the bundle upstream that is controlling that complex?
So in a normal person,
Uh-huh.
in the intact state, the vagus nerve is responsible for turning the switch to fed,
Okay.
and then responsible for turning the fed off. So it's not, you don't turn fasting on, it's just when fed is on, it's on. When fed is off, you're in fasting. So the natural motions of the gut are this cleaning motions. It's only when the vagus turns on that you go to fed state. So it's really a one-way toggle. You just toggle to fed, and then when that's done, it just flips back to not fed. But it's vagal control. You had a question?
It's all right.
Dr. Karazian talks about certain exercises you could do. Maybe Dr. Bashtani could help me out here. So he talks about gargling. He talks about gag reflex, and then he talks about doing a coffee enema and holding it for like as long as you can. And he claims that this stimulates the vagal nerve, it stimulates the migrating motor complex. Have you seen this information, or does it make any sense to you?
So coffee enemas will stimulate motility for sure.
Okay.
So caffeine, no matter how you administer it,
Right.
but more potently if you administer it directly, it has
Right.
some effect. So I wouldn't doubt that would be beneficial. We do a test at Cedars to test if the vagus nerve is broken. So let's say you had a surgery for reflux, and they wrapped the stomach as one of the surgeries that the surgeons do. But as they did that, they broke the vagus nerves. The only way to tell that is to get somebody, not quite gargle, but similar to that, chew a little bit of food, but don't swallow it, spit it out. And that's called the cephalic phase. You're activating the vagus nerve. But when you activate the vagus nerve, the toggle switch goes to fed. It doesn't go to cleaning. So the moment you put something gum, it will turn you to fed. Candy, it'll turn you to fed. Anything that has calories or stimulates the oral cavity as if a meal will turn the vagus nerve to fed and turn off the cleaning waves. So that's why one of our diet instructions is 3 to 5 hours between meals, give yourself a chance to have a cleaning wave. Water is fine. Water does not do it because it's non-caloric. So there's certain things that you can do to augment the amount of time you have to do the cleaning.
So I have a question about that.
Yeah.
Because in working with patients on this diet, a lot of them have a really difficult time with the 3 to 5 hours.
Yeah.
Is there a smaller window that works? Is there a range? I mean, is 3 the minimum, or could they go 2, 2.5?
You sound like one of my patients. They're constantly negotiating about the 5 hours. So humans were built, if you think of the American Indians, you killed a buffalo, the entire tribe ate the buffalo, there's no refrigerator, you gotta eat it now, fresh or it's rotting, and then you couldn't eat for a while, maybe berries and this and that. So we're feast and famine organisms. And that's why we absorb so well, as opposed to cows that are grazers. They have to. Cows and elephants and these kinds of ruminating animals, it's a disadvantage because you're constantly eating. You have to constantly eat, otherwise you don't get enough calories. We can feast, and we can keep it and store it, and we don't have to eat for 2 or 3 days without any problems. And that's why we have these cleaning waves, because in between the meals, we're cleaning and we're doing all this stuff. Cows can't clean, because if they clean, they die. It's an interesting system. If you give a cow and sterilize its gut with antibiotics, it dies in 2 days. Cows are interdependent on their microbiome so directly. They get all their calories from the bugs. They don't get it from the grass. They get the grass goes in the stomach, the bacteria start digesting the grass, they bring the bacteria up, they chew the bacteria, and they get the yogurt, so to speak, of the bacteria as their calories. It's not like humans. Humans are better at absorbing and doing all that stuff. But my point is, we're built to fast, not to have 7-Elevens, not to have chips on candies on the desk all day like we do now. But you could probably go to 4 hours. That's the short answer.
So not 3 even?
Yeah, I told you she's negotiating.
I had hypoglycemia and was very concerned about being able to make that.
Right. Well, I mean, if there's a medical need to go shorter, you got to go shorter. But I like 4 to 5.
It begs the question: what does your ideal diet look like? Not necessarily your diet personally, but what would you recommend in terms of timing and substance of the diet?
For a patient with IBS?
Yes, and in general, for a healthy person.
Well, there's a lot of things to think about with diet. If you think about the Mediterranean diet, for example. People who live in Greece or southern Europe, what do they eat? They eat fish, they eat cheese, they eat bread, they eat olives, and they have wine. And the next day they do the same thing over again. It's a very healthy diet, but it's also relatively straightforward and simple. In the US, we'll have Greek food one night, Indian the next, Italian, we'll go to McDonald's in there sometime, and then we might have a burrito. So we're doing all this stuff. Our liver's can't predict what we're gonna have from moment to moment, and our gut cannot predict what we're gonna have from moment to moment. So we're kind of shocking our system every time we eat here. So I'm exaggerating a little bit in the way I'm describing this, but what we try to do is we say, look, we try to give them things that don't ferment easily. So less roughage, less fiber. We space out the meals so they have time for cleaning waves. We avoid non-absorbed carbohydrates, so things like sucralose, which is Splenda, or even stevia, which is a non-absorbed kind of sugar that bacteria can digest, but humans can't. So we try to avoid those things, so there's less fermentation, less food, the bacteria can't grow to higher numbers, and they actually diminish a little bit. So we think the diet can help them.
The tricky part about that diet is that the diet that's most beneficial for patients with SIBO is a high glycemic diet, because carbohydrates that take longer to digest, we often are focused on because we're trying to help patients with blood sugar problems. And any carbohydrate that takes longer to digest is, by definition, going to be a less, absorbable carbohydrate that's going to feed the bacteria more.
Yeah.
So
the
unfortunately,
white-
the SIBO diet is going to be.
Yeah, it's the white stuff, the
Yeah.
regular sugar. I mean, that's okay because it gets absorbed so easily. But the harder to digest sugars, the longer starches are harder, or will be exposed to bacteria, therefore give them food for more bacteria. Question here.
So, doing intermittent fasting, would that help with SIBO?
Right, so one of the things that we discovered is that in the 1970s there was an elemental diet that came about which was called Vivanex. And Vivanex was all broken down food completely, but it's 100% recommended daily allowance of minerals, vitamins, and everything. And when they gave that before they did colon surgery, it reduced the bacteria in the colon so much, the colon surgery had less chance of infections if they cut pieces of colon out. So they started to do this Vivanex. We started to do it thinking if we starve the bacteria long enough, we could get rid of bacterial overgrowth. And we figured out 7, 10, 14, 21 days. 14 is the ideal number of days. So the bacteria hang on like by your fingernail, or by their fingernail. I don't know if they have fingernails. But they hang on until about day 10. And between 10 and 14, they really, that's it. If we go to 21, we can get a few extra percentage, but we get about 85% eradication with 14 days of elemental diet. Problem with the elemental diet is the first 2 days the patients hate me, the last 4 days the patients hate me, and I can feel them hating me when they're at home. Because the first 3 days they're like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm going to do this. Then they get into a groove, and the last 4 days they say, can't wait till I'm done, and they start thinking about me again in a negative way. And so.
Now, you use that sometimes for patients as a primary form of care for patients, for example, who don't want to take antibiotics.
Correct. It's a natural way to get rid of the overgrowth. And that's, for some patients, that's awesome because they really like the idea of a natural way of getting rid of it. It's just harder. It's harder, that's all.
So I'm interested in this question particularly because we're trying to find natural alternatives to increase GI motility. So when you're trying to come up with, say, a medication that improves GI motility, how do you figure out which one is going to improve the MMC versus the postprandial motility?
Right. It doesn't matter. What matters is when you give the drug. So if you give the drug at night, you cannot trigger the eating motility because they're not eating.
Okay.
So we give the dosing at bedtime for
Right.
the prokinetic, and then all it can do all night is make cleaning waves. Now, it won't work in the day, likely, but if you can get enough at night, you're able to keep it away longer, and we showed that in the study in about 2008. So if we keep giving the prokinetic, we can double the length of time between treatments.
Now, doesn't serotonin promote gut motility?
Well, Zelnorm was a serotonin agonist. It was the best agent for preventing, but we don't have it anymore.
So we could use like 5-HTP and give it to the patients at night before bed, so it would facilitate sleep, and it might stimulate them migrating motor complex.
Yeah, it's possible. I haven't studied it, but it's possible.
So will magnesium. Magnesium, maybe?
What?
You had said magnesium. I'm saying.
Well, that's another
But
thing.
magnesium also has laxative effects too,
Yeah.
so that's the downside of magnesium.
What about CBD oil?
So CBD oil has not been well studied, but there's definitely cannabinoid receptors in the gut, and they definitely have effects on motility, but I haven't,
Because
nobody's.
it's gonna relax the vagus nerve.
Yeah.
It completely relaxes their system, so
Right.
that would be the benefit to get the cleaning wheels.
So one of the downsides of that is, though, in what we see is it turns the motility completely off. It antagonizes motility. It really depends on what, cannabinoid receptor it
Right.
grabs onto. But a lot of them, they're great for nausea because the irritated moving stomach stops, and then the nausea stops. So that's why they're so effective there. But the flip side is it could paralyze the gut more, making the overgrowth more stasis. So it would have to be studied to know exactly which way it went. But it's a good idea, definitely.
What about the people that have maybe something different going on, or a coexisting issue with maybe yeast or some kind of overgrowth of bacteria that would respond poorly to simple carbohydrates?
And there's something called SIBO, which is small intestinal fungal
Right,
overgrowth.
Dr. Satish Rao is working a lot on that these days. So one of the things we are always worried about is whether SIBO, what part of this could be fungal. And Dr. Rao is now sorting it out because he's doing a lot of cultures for overgrowth out in Georgia. But if we gave antibiotics to a fungal patient, the fungal issues would be worse if the fungus was the cause. Now, I can't say we don't always get worse. We get 70% of patients get better on rifaximin, which is a purely antibacterial agent. But the reason we went with rifaximin, just to digress a little bit, is rifaximin was an antibiotic emerging from Europe, doesn't get absorbed into the body, 99.6 retain in the body, precipitates in the colon, does not touch the colon flora. And we know that now based on a study that's coming out. And it has no side effects, doesn't cause bacterial resistance. So the FDA approval of rifaximin for IBS was contingent on knowing that it could work more than one time, that it didn't cause bacterial resistance, and it didn't, and that it didn't hurt the natural flora of the colon. 98% of the bugs that were there on day one were still there after 3 treatments of rifaximin. So that's pretty impressive, because so many other antibiotics would be apocalyptic to the flora of the colon.
On the other hand, a large percentage of patients who get treated with rifaximin get recurrence.
Yes.
And maybe some of those could be because of SIBO.
Right, exactly, and those things are being wrestled with now. Or the patients who don't respond to rifaximin, maybe some of those are SIBO, and those are the questions that Dr. Rao is answering, and we'll have more answers.
Be nice if there was a breath test for SIBO.
That sure would be. But see, they don't produce hydrogen, they produce carbon dioxide, which we produce also, which is, harder.
When you do the elements plan, do you also use a prokinetic, or could you, or would you not?
After the elemental diet, you better use a prokinetic,
But not
because,
during.
no, not during. But elemental diet, one downside of it,
Bitter,
hmm?
very bitter.
It's bitter, but a lot of patients get yeast on their tongue. So they do get a thrush kind of thing from it because it's so bioavailable.
It's like
that-
pure sugar is
Yeah,
one of the ingredients.
so when we're talking about SIBO, that's why I don't think SIBO's a big problem. I think it's a problem, but I don't think it's proportionally, maybe 10% of IBS, maybe a little more. That's what we're starting to see. But because if you gave Vivanex to SIBO, it's a good thing for them. They love that. And we're not seeing worsening, we're seeing improvement, so, in most cases.
Now, I know that you've written about the fact that when you're treating a patient for SIBO, you don't restrict their diet because you want the bacteria well fed. And then afterwards, you'll put them on a restricted carbohydrate diet, like a low FODMAP diet or a specific carbohydrate diet, or you have a specific diet. Now, the interesting thing is, I know a lot of functional medicine doctors like myself, like Dr. Seebecker, like a lot of doctors in the room here who treat SIBO effectively using natural agents, and we, pretty much all of us, put the patients on some sort of restricted carbohydrate diet at the same time. So I wonder how that could be, that, we still get good results even without, without having well-fed bacteria. It seems to work better for us because patients get the symptomatic relief at the same time that we're actually treating the bacteria.
Well, so it just depends on what you're doing as a treatment. So for example, with rifaximin, so antibiotics work on replicating bacteria that are doing their thing. If they're not doing their thing, or they're starved, or they form spores, some of them, or they wall off their cells to protect themselves against the harsh environment of not having enough food. And so antibiotics can't penetrate those bugs when they're in hibernation, as we call it. That's been known since the 1970s. So the way you get antibiotics to work the best is the bacteria are really happy. When they're really happy and multiplying, that's when you, and the principle of giving conventional antibiotics every 8 hours is you give it, you kill off the ones that are replicating, and because they're gone, the ones that are hibernating say, oh, there's lots of room, and wake up, and then you kill them again at 8 hours. And that's the principle of that 8 hours. Rather than continuous IV antibiotics, they don't do that. They do that in shots. And the shots are purposeful and timed purposeful to the awakening of the bacteria you're trying to kill, the ones who were in hibernation. So that's why we tend to feed. However, if you're doing a different approach, if you're using a prokinetic approach or using other things, then it's not dependent on that kind of phenomenon.
Interesting, yeah. I'm not sure how some of the antimicrobials that we use, like berberine and oregano and neem, and
They might work totally differently.
So
Or,
the aspects, you're dealing with colodox there, some bioflow, to some extent, within that area.
Could you
A lot of
speak
these
louder,
drugs, like
please?
yeah, Adam, speak up a little bit.
What's that?
Louder.
Speak up a little bit.
Louder and slower.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Listening to all these great metaphors going, write this stuff down.
he's excited.
Yes, it's cool stuff. I'm from Metagenics.
Hey.
So basically speaking, with many of these herbs, these bitter herbs, what happens is you deal with the actual receptor sites on the tongue, which deal with parietal formation, which deals with increasing gastrin, which increases cholecystokinin, which increases bile flow. Bile flow is nice and bacteriostatic, but in addition to that, has the capacity to be able to form a lubricant for the gut. So another way to be able to deal with that enhancement of flow might be to be able to do that. So that's where a lot of these bitter herbs come in, from Oregon grape to berberine-containing herbs. They also work in other factors which are more like antibiotics, but the biggest flow usually is the actual flow from the top of gastrin down to cholecystokinin and bile flow, bile being bacteriostatic, and the stomach acidity being bacteriostatic, obviously, as well. So that's why the Mullins research that we have up here, which shows the utilization of a red thyme oil combination along with a berberine combination, shown in comparison to rifaximin, showed to be equivalent in its effectiveness. It had some benefits to it, but it's a different approach.
Right.
So it's known that some of the things that help to keep the small intestine aseptic and relatively free of bacteria are digestive enzymes, bile, hydrochloric acid. Have you explored using some of those agents?
So acid kills bacteria, no doubt. But I'll get back to that because there's a caveat to that. So acid kills bacteria, and that's why if you eat an apple off the table that has bacteria on it, it's being killed by the acid in your stomach. Bile acids are detergents, so they're like soap. So they're going to break down bacteria. And pancreatic enzymes are digesting all the proteins on the surface of the bacteria that help it function. So yeah, it breaks things down. But in the case of acid, it's a little complicated because I know a lot of people are taking betaine, HCl, and other supplements, even apple cider vinegar.
Yep.
And so when it comes to the constipation side of IBS, we know that methanogens and methane is slowing the gut down. So the methane organisms, which are blooming, not the overgrowth, but the blooming, they make methane from hydrogen. And that source can be hydrogen gas or it can be acid. So what we notice is if you're on a PPI, your methane goes down. It's a proton pump inhibitor. When you're on acid, your methane goes up because they've got fuel now. They're creating tons of energy from the acid that you're taking. So if you're constipated, I would not be doing the HCl. I would not be doing the apple cider vinegar. I would be doing the opposite. And so it's not quite simple.
But we could
it's
say,
interesting.
for example, use digestive enzymes.
Yes, digestive enzymes. Or you do a breath test and you know what they have and you can
Right,
tailor your treatment,
exactly.
which is kind of how we do it. So-
Now, when you do the breath test, do you always use lactulose, or do you ever use glucose or fructose, or some people have even used sugar alcohols?
Sorbitol, yeah. So we use lactulose, and there's controversy about why one sugar is chosen over another. For example, glucose.
By the way, is everyone familiar with the hydrogen breath test and how it works?
No,
Okay.
it's okay.
I can explain. So it's very simple. Is that the human body produces really one gas, carbon dioxide,
Right.
but bacteria can produce other gases, hydrogen and methane. They can also produce carbon dioxide, but then you don't know who's making it. But hydrogen and methane are only made by bacteria in the gut. And so when you drink a sugar syrup and then the bacteria start to ferment it, they start creating these gases. And when we detect the gases, either hydrogen or methane, we can say, based on the time you drank the sugar to the time we see the rise on the breath test, that it's in the small bowel or the colon, and what gases are there, therefore what types of organisms are there. And that's how the breath test works.
Thank you.
Now, the question was glucose as the substrate. The problem with glucose is it gets absorbed so quickly. You only see the first 3 feet of small bowel. By that time, the glucose is in your body because you're very good at picking up glucose. And so the last 9 feet of small bowel, you're not going to know if it's overgrowth there. Whereas lactulose gets all the way through. Problem with lactulose, it doesn't get absorbed at all. When it gets to the colon, there's a ton of bacteria there. So if it gets there fast, you might have the feeling you have overgrowth based on the test, but it's really fast transit. So there's false positives on the lactulose and a lot of false negatives on the glucose. But we tend to use lactulose because we want to get a comprehensive look, and especially methane, which is in the colon, so or can be in the colon. So we want to get a comprehensive look, so we use lactulose.
Now, some of the bacteria feed on, like, aren't there bacteria that feed more on fructose, say, than on lactulose or glucose?
Yeah, so I mean, fructose is an interesting one because if you eat fructose and you have bacterial overgrowth, well, fructose is hard to digest, so you're going to get a positive breath test. It doesn't mean you're fructose intolerant. Same with lactose intolerance. We do a lactose breath test. If you have overgrowth, you could have a false positive breath test saying, oh, that person's lactose intolerant because of this. No, it's overgrowth. So we've come up with a consensus on breath testing, which is going to be published very, very shortly. It's accepted in a journal already, but we presented it at the big GI meeting. So we'll be able to tell you exactly how to do breath testing in 2017 based on that document, which is coming out. So.
And I understand that there are patients who are negative on the breath test, and it could be because instead of hydrogen or methane, they're producing hydrogen sulfide, right?
So that's an uncommon situation, but it happens. And we have a new machine at Cedars that we're validating for measuring all 4 gases: carbon dioxide, hydrogen, methane, and hydrogen sulfide. So we'll have that study done in another 6 weeks.
Interesting.
I can't tell you the results.
So to do the breath test, you need a machine? We can't, it's not something I was gonna ask.
So there are
how do you do
kits, there are
that?
companies that sell kits.
Genova Labs, for example.
Genova does it.
Genova does that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Commonwealth Labs in Boston is a big popular one as well, and there are other smaller players in the field. Yes, sir.
So for the time being, I know there was some debate on what's a positive methane level. Is it 3? Is it 10? Is it?
Yes. So based on the new new consensus was a group of the scientists, including Dr. Rao and other people that I mentioned earlier, from around North America. So it's a North American consensus. And they all decided 10 would be the cutoff for methane, which is higher than I would have wanted, but it's a consensus, so I have to,
What
be
would have been your
obedient to the,
preference?
because what we've seen is that anything over 5 is 99% predictive that it goes over 10. So we think of 5 as indicative enough with 99% certainty. But I think they wanted something very definitive for study purposes, for research purposes.
And for hydrogen, do you use 120 minutes over?
We use
20?
90 minutes
90.
with a 20 part per million rise. Oh, way over there.
So you made it clear about the possibilities for false negatives and false positives of the glucose. But how do the companies that sell kits, how do those tests compare to the in-lab tests?
So we haven't worked with Genova specifically, but we worked with Commonwealth and helped validate their test. So we had their test kits and our live breath tests, and we sent the tubes to Commonwealth, and there was 98% correlation what they got, what we got. So whatever they're doing with their tubes is working great. Now, I'm not saying Genova's bad. We just haven't had the opportunity to do the validation with them.
Which test was that you said had the 98%?
Commonwealth Labs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
I wanted to know if you can make any comment about malabsorption in general. I've noticed I'm a family practice, board certified family practice doc, and I do regular testing, and cholesterol, for instance, I'll see in people, some with symptoms and some without. With GI symptoms, we get very, very, very low, and not a statin drug, nothing else going on.
Right. Low cholesterol in their blood, you mean?
Correct,
Yeah.
low serum cholesterol. And maybe also low vitamin D, and then I'll do a breath test, a home a breath test, and it'll look positive for SIBO. And sometimes I'll treat them and the cholesterol will correct, and some of them it won't. And so to me, I'm just trying to piece together the malabsorption piece in general GI, and then in SIBO. I wonder if you could comment.
So malabsorption, it's a complicated, very long-winded issue. Let me get to that in a second. But what I will tell you is that cholesterol is influenced by bacterial overgrowth. So we see that methane on the breath test is associated with obesity. So I'm getting to a point about the cholesterol with that. Anybody over 30 BMI was studied in our office for breath testing. And the ones of the people over 30 BMI who had methane, the ones with methane had 40 pounds more weight than the people who didn't have methane. And then we did an 800 patient free range study, everybody coming for breath tests. And those with methane and hydrogen together on their breath test had nearly 40 pounds more weight. And then we took pre-diabetic patients and we tested their methane, they were methane positive, and we got rid of methane in 8 and not in 3. And the ones we got rid of in methane in 8, their cholesterol went down. Their cholesterol was high to begin with. The ones who didn't get rid of methane, the cholesterol stayed the same. Their blood sugars improved. Their insulin went down. Something about methane is not good for metabolism. That doesn't answer your question, but bacterial overgrowth of the hydrogen nature can be malabsorbing if it's profound, and may be associated with lower cholesterol or malabsorption. Then the vitamin D issue you mentioned, so I'll touch on that for a second. So in the 1920s and 30s, we had a vitamin D lecture this morning, and I asked this question this morning because the speaker was one of our fellows. But I asked her, I said, in the 1920s and 30s, rickets was a big problem in the United States. So people were administering, you probably know this from the dietary standpoint, put vitamin D in cereals, in milk, and all of that. So in the 1970s and 80s is where we established vitamin D levels in the blood. But we're all on milk with vitamin D and cereal with vitamin D. So we're all hyper supplemented with vitamin D. So we don't really know what the normal range of vitamin D is because we're all getting it in our products artificially. And now people stop drinking milk because it's causing bloating, or there's like a change. People are moving away from dairy. And now we're saying we're vitamin D deficient, even though we live in California where there's beautiful sun. The question is that vitamin D deficient or that normal without having milk fortified? So there's a lot of controversies about whether vitamin D deficiency is real or not real. And I don't know if I have the answer to your question on that, but.
But in general, that you're thinking the hydrogen dominant people do have more tendency that we think it's a malabsorption of good nutrients going on? Or is it, we don't really?
So it depends. For example, one of the ways you diagnose bacterial overgrowth in dogs is a folate level, because bacteria produce folate, and the folate are through the roof. But bacteria can also eat B12, so you can get B12 deficient from high levels of bacterial overgrowth. So there's different nutrients that the bacteria are using and taking away from you, and others that it's giving to you in high quantities. Vitamin K is another example of, you can change vitamin K levels by changing bacteria in the gut. So I don't know if I'm answering your question.
And then, of course, once you have bacterial overgrowth, it affects absorption of nutrients.
Yeah.
So that, you end up with various nutritional deficiencies just because you have the intestinal wall is not able to properly absorb.
So what about syndromes that may mimic SIBO, like recent antibiotic use with diarrhea, or a remote history of C. diff, and now they have diarrhea, and you're wondering, is this a recurrence of C. diff, or is this IBS with SIBO, and they've been treated with antibiotics?
Yeah.
And normally when I have patients treated with antibiotics, I give them probiotics, which I know is not the right idea to do with SIBO. So how do you tease
No,
that?
actually, it's been shown to be effective for SIBO.
Oh,
Yeah,
well,
it depends.
yeah,
It
it depends.
So it's a
Good
complicated
point.
question, but C. diff has CDTB toxin.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
it's one of the ones that can cause IBS. So once you had C. diff and you got antibiotics for your C. diff or whatever was bad enough that you needed antibiotics, the chance of you developing IBS is about 1 in 10.
Okay.
So that can happen. Probiotics have been shown to be beneficial in C. diff for sure. So that there's nothing unwise about doing probiotics there. In bacterial overgrowth, it's controversial because there are studies from Italy that say it works. There are bifidobacteria that certain strains can trigger migrating motor complexes. We've known that for more than a decade. But the probiotic thing got a little kick in the pants because probiotics got a little ahead of the science, and now science caught up a little. There's a Placide study in Lancet, 3,000 patients receiving antibiotics for an upper respiratory tract or urinary infection, 1,500 randomized to probiotics, 1,500 just got the antibiotic, no probiotics, and the only benefit of the probiotic is if you got the probiotic, you were more bloated. So the conclusion of that study is if you want to be bloated, take the probiotic. And I'm not knocking probiotics, but that's the largest study, double-blind randomized controlled trial to date on antibiotics and using concomitant probiotics. The counter argument is, well, they use that strain, but this other strain is special, it doesn't do that. So you can't say every probiotic works the same, but I'm sorry.
Was that after they finished the antibiotics, they took the probiotics?
Concomitantly.
Concomitantly, okay.
Yeah.
Right. So what about the probiotic strains? And I mean, there's so many different strains out there, and there's some strains that we know that are in the gut, and then there's different ones, and then there's Saccharomyces boulardii, and then there's all these different strains, and they're for different things. But I haven't found really good resource about how to use, except for maybe antibiotic-associated diarrhea with the lacto whatever it is, GG,
Yeah.
lactobacillus GG, and then the Saccharomyces. Those are clearly beneficial. Is there any kind of resource that guides therapy with regards to specific strains?
So, I mean, that's another complicated. If you go to your Walgreens or the GNC, there's like a wall of probiotics. And there isn't a wall of trials on all those probiotics. And so it's really complicated for all of you and for your patients to try and figure out, what do I do? Do I get the ones in the refrigerator? Do I get ones dry? And which ones are live? Which ones are really live? Which ones really contain what they're supposed to contain? And all of that's been looked at, and it isn't always correct. What's on the bottle isn't always what's in the pill. I could go on for an hour about probiotics, and I'm not knocking them. I think what we understand in 2017 is there's 1,000 to 2,000 different types of bacteria in your gut, not one. One will never solve the problem, and it's like eating broccoli every day and that's all you eat. It's really good for you, but you need more than just broccoli, and you see what I'm saying? And so that's why There's cocktails of probiotics, which apparently are better, and fecal transplant is probably the real deal, and which is why everybody's gravitating towards fecal transplant. But
Right.
that's a whole other. There's a question.
On that note,
Yeah.
going back to the diet recommendations, I agree that obviously the pulling out the low FODMAP diet, pulling out those non-digestible carbohydrates is a good fit for treating SIBO, right? But then when you look at the gut microbiome research that's starting to come out, and we have a long way to go with that, it's starting to show over and over again that a high fiber diet is beneficial for creating this beneficial gut microbiome, which causes an issue here. So where do you think this is going?
Mhm.
And at what point, if you think this is a good suggestion, would you recommend a patient start to switch to start incorporating more high fiber foods?
Mhm.
So I try to give my answers some interesting aspects, so that, because I could go on and on about the answers to that question.
Right.
But if you don't have IBS, a high fiber diet is perfectly a healthy thing
Well,
to
this
do.
is for people that are treated for SIBO
Yeah.
and have IBS, but then eventually you want to so I guess my question is multifaceted. Like, do you recommend that a person that has SIBO, IBS, are they a candidate for a high fiber diet ever?
Have they been treated and are they better?
Well, that's another part of it, right? So at what point, if yes is the answer to that first question, then at what point do you start liberalizing the diet from a low FODMAP and
Yeah.
start including more high fiber foods?
Well, now you've added a little complexity to it because you mentioned low FODMAP.
Right.
Low FODMAP diet is by definition unhealthy. You cannot sustain it for long periods of time. Even the group in Australia who discovered it, Kate Scarlotta, who's a very prominent,
She's a
probably,
friend, yeah.
no more than 2 months. She won't give it for more than 2 months. She'll start liberalizing.
Like 2 to 6.
Yeah. So it's too hard, and they can't sustain it. Plus, it's a little unhealthy.
Right. So do you agree with that?
Do I agree with liberalizing? I do.
Yeah.
But that's why we came up with our low fermentation diet. Not that I'd say it's better, because it's not the low FODMAP diet goes to an extreme.
Right.
And that's how it works. So it's like saying to an IBS patient, "Oh, you'll be better. Just don't eat it all." But that's what the elemental diet does. It kind of starves the bacteria almost entirely. The FODMAP starves the bacteria a lot, but also starving you, and so it helps the IBS patients. My low fermentation diet will not help the IBS patients acutely very much, but is really good at after you treat to keep it from coming back, and that's really, really important.
I don't find the low FODMAP to be too bad. Like my patients, I don't have
Well,
an
it's a
issue.
little paleo. It's a little, it's a lot of.
Between the
You're not
Monash
really.
University
Oh wow,
app,
I'm good.
Yeah.
She's correcting me.
with Kate's website's
Yeah.
great. Patsy Katzos' website's fantastic. She's
Yeah.
got cookbooks too, I think, on the market now.
It's getting
and
easier.
it
It's
is-
getting
it
easier
is.
to
Like, my
follow.
patients are actually like, I don't care, I'll do it, I feel great. I don't, not too often do I have them say, like when I'm like, all right, let's stay on this for 2 months and then reassess. None of them are like, oh, this is awful. They're like, okay, great. They're happy to do it. And these are the ones that don't cook, and they are fine. But I just wondered, because it's we're all sort of like, all right, we'll figure this out as we go a little bit, because eventually we'd like them to be at a point where they can eat like everybody else.
So from a functional medicine perspective, right, you use the low FODMAP in the remove phase, and then in the repair and reinoculate phase, that's when you go back to a higher fiber and add back prebiotics and try to restore intestinal health, and hopefully they don't relapse.
Sure.
And if they do, then you go back to remove again.
Problem is we don't know what intestinal health is exactly.
Right.
I was just at a microbiome course I spoke at in San Diego about 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and all the world experts, at least U.S. world experts, kind of like world champions of basketball, but it's only the U.S. Sorry, I was a little off. But they're the world experts in microbiome, the U.S. guys or people, and at the end of it, I realized we really don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
And, they haven't figured it all out yet. It's too complicated.
But don't we know at least diversity is a good thing?
Diversity is a good thing.
Right.
Let me give you another example. I know you're begging for a question. I'll get to you, I promise.
Of course.
But the methane story, where methane is constipating. The number one place on the planet where if you check the breath of a human, they're methane positive 80% of the time. Here it's less than 20%. 80% of people in one part of the world are methane positive. Sub-Saharan Africa. High fiber diets, different quality food, not a lot of, carbs, free carbs.
Right.
Okay? You import those people here, they get obese. So the methanogen is actually beneficial. It's a survival mechanism
Right.
for them. They harvest energy from foods that aren't easy to harvest from, and they help you. That's a good thing. It's not good when you have 7-Eleven and candies and everything
Right.
sitting on your desk, and then you gain weight. So the African American population struggles with weight gain, and the number of women who are methane positive in African American populations is way higher than Caucasian, and that's part of that's a microbiome that's maybe genetically determined
Right.
or familial determined because you
Or
live with your.
like what you're saying, like maybe there's a very significant divide in what they're eating, or like that they're not getting this combination of really high fiber foods that might be giving them this really great gut microbiome.
Could be. So
in
maybe a
addition
high
to
fiber
the
diet in
cell
that population is helpful to them.
Right.
Because that's their microbiome is used to that, and that's a good. So what I'm saying is, eventually the microbiome work will hopefully be customizable. What the treatments could be, and it could be the range of things you talked about, but we just don't have that sophistication yet.
Yeah.
Promised I
You may
was
have
good.
inadvertently answered my question, but I wanted
Could you
to-
talk louder?
You may have inadvertently answered my question, but I wanted to ask you what your personal opinion was of the clinical utility of things like tests like the CDSA. And the reason I ask this is that oftentimes I have done these studies, breath tests concurrently with CDSA or doctor's data, those types of tests that use culture and DNA. And when I'll have negative breath tests, but I'll have an overpopulation of Methanobrevibacter and Smithii. And these patients have every markings of SIBO, so I end up treating them and they get better, but their breath tests were completely normal. Am I dealing with hydrogen sulfide gas patients?
I can tell you that. Are we being recorded? I think we are. I can't tell you that, but it's possible. I'm sorry, that was the shortest answer I've given all evening, but it's possible it could be hydrogen sulfide, or sometimes the methanogens are low in number, but they're still causing symptoms, but they don't show up on the breath test, and we've actually shown that also.
But they'll overgrow, like they'll be very high on a stool test.
Right. Well, the methanogens will, yeah. Are you using the Genova? Is that where you're
I'm
finding?
using Genova or
Yeah,
Dr.
because
Zeta.
they do PCR for Smithii now.
Yes.
Could you expand a little bit more on the relationship between SIBO and autoimmune?
So the cause, as a cause? Yeah, so we now measure 2 antibodies. This is a test that is commercially available, also through Commonwealth. It measures anti-CDTB and anti-vinculin, and the test is, if positive, 95+% predictive of IBS. So the reason this is important is there's a number of things. Number one, I saw a patient in my office, a woman, 25 years old, 25, diarrhea, IBS. She's had 3 normal colonoscopies. Okay, that's a shame. Okay, that is sick. Because if you do one, the first one you say, well, it was IBS as a young person, what are they going to have? Okay, maybe you're looking for Crohn's disease. The second doctor, why are they doing it again? The third doctor, I'll give you their name. Because that's ridiculous. I mean, so the point is, if you had a test that says, stop, this is what it is, with 95% certainty, and medical certainty is 80%. So this is more than medically certain that they have IBS. You don't need all of this. But the other part is, this is a funny story, true story. I had this guy, is East Indian descent. He travels to India. He got Campylobacter in India. He developed IBS. He flies from Boston to see me. And so he comes about once every 6 months just to touch base. And he's done very well. We've treated him. Everything's fine. And it's been 10 years I've been seeing him. And then the blood test came out, and he says, I'd like to do the blood test. I heard about the blood test. I said, no, you don't even need the blood test. He says, why? I said, because you're better, and I know what you had. We've gone through this. He says, no, I want it. So I do the blood test. He called me a week later. He says, what'd it show? I said, it's positive. He said, oh, thank God. And I said, you've been seeing me for 10 years. We know what this is for you. He says, yeah, but now I know. So, look, we may be doctors, but we are treating the patient. And the patient wants to know. If you had a sibling or a child or a brother or whatever that had these symptoms, wouldn't you want to know for sure? And it tells you what caused it. And so anyways, getting back to your question about autoimmunity, the antivinculin, the higher it is, the sicker the patient is. The harder they are to treat. The harder anything is to work, whether you use allopathic or naturopathic. It's harder because the density and the destruction of those cells that cause the motility is worse and worse and worse the higher those antibodies are. And so we actually use it as a gauge of how well they'll do. And women tend to get autoimmune diseases more than men and get this autoimmunity. So the antivinculin, that's probably why more women have IBS, and maybe that's the final explanation.
And there's also a correlation between IBS and other autoimmune diseases like MS. I've seen a few studies.
And fibromyalgia and other things.
So, with finding there's this toxin produced by an organism that's now destroying tissue through an autoimmune component, causing an overgrowth, it sounds like a lot of times what we're treating is the overgrowth, or at least trying to deal with the overgrowth. Do you potentially see a paradigm shift taking place to where we're not treating IBS and SIBO merely by trying to take care of the bacteria that are overgrowth, but dealing with the autoimmune or trying to solve the riddle that's why they're getting the SIBO in the first place?
Do you want to work in my lab?
Love
That's exactly what we're trying to do. We're figuring out a way of getting that antibody out of the bloodstream. And we have. We've done one patient. Now this is... So one patient who was extremely ill with very bad distension, we did plasmapheresis. It's like blood filtering, like hemodialysis. So you got to put a tube in and you got to filter the blood, got all the antibodies out of the blood, and especially this one, gone. She was cured for a month. So we know if we get rid of that antibody, this is done. We just have to get rid of it, and it's not an easy thing to do. Technologically, it's a complicated thing to do, but we're working on it. That's what we're focused on now. So.
that's
And potentially balancing the immune system. That's what we're often trying to do.
Yeah,
functional
balancing the
medicine.
immune system, but
So I had a question about getting back to the. Oh, did somebody else have a question? I'm monopolizing. About the whole fiber thing and the low fiber, and prebiotics, which is basically fiber. So it's the probiotics that if you're taking probiotics, whether or not it's for SIBO or for antibiotic-associated diarrhea or whatever it is. How much traction is that probiotic having without some kind of substrate, like a prebiotic or the food, that you're to feed it? Is it wasted? And at what point do you even consider prebiotics? Or,
I mean, when probiotics were hitting a highlight in about year 2000, then prebiotics started to become popular because it would allow the probiotic to establish itself better. But again, not a lot of randomized controlled trials. What I can tell you in IBS, there are 16 double-blind trials on probiotics. Only one was successful. They were all failures. So
what do you mean failures? You mean
failures
they
meaning
didn't
no
work?
clinical benefit,
Yeah.
just from the probiotic strains that were used in those trials alone. So it's been a bit of a disappointment, and probably because the cleaning waves are bad. If you think about the cleaning waves being bad and you're adding bacteria, they produce gas too. Probiotics produce gases, and that can cause distension, and maybe contribute to some of the bloating. What we'd like is a probiotic like was discovered, there's a bifido that can cause the cleaning waves to work. Maybe some of the strains that are out there, and nobody's systematically gone through them, because I know patients. They come to my office, they say, I tried that, I'm great. And I said, well, what is it that you've tried? It was Florastor or this or that, or one of the, over-the-counters. And I don't know why sometimes it's brilliant, and sometimes it's not brilliant. And so I don't have an easy answer to your question because I know it works in some cases, but I don't know why. And I'm a why guy.
Now, isn't it the case that there's actually some benefit to producing these gases in the colon? In fact, they're somewhat anti-cancer, right?
That, and also can promote motility because distension of the colon makes the colon want to move to clear stuff. So yeah, there's benefits. But
So there's a downside to patients maybe being on a low FODMAP or a low fiber diet, or
we don't know. We don't know yet.
What
So-
about diets rich in fermented foods, like the Koreans?
Like kimchi.
Yeah.
I don't see a problem with that, but if you, again, some of those contain bacteria,
Yeah.
and people are eating them extensively now. I will say that fermented foods are now believed to be the cause of stomach cancer in Japan and Korea, which is higher in those countries. Now, again, it's still up for debate, but too many. Go for you first, left to right.
So just to summarize it, the issue when we're talking about that there's an overgrowth of bacteria and that they're killing these nerve complexes, and from what I'm hearing from you, the nerve complexes never recover. So the best we can do is keep the bacteria balanced as much as we can so that people don't get symptoms. So I'm left wondering if there's any research on anything to heal the nerves or to grow more nerves. Like stem cell, I can't really think how it could lend itself. But I'm thinking about human growth hormone. There's just interesting, a lot more animal research or people who are sicker, like with short bowel syndrome, and that it helped intestinal lining. But I don't know if it was helping the nerves in the intestinal lining or other integrity.
Well, it's a good question. It kind of speaks to your question, which is that if we took all the antibodies that are against the nerves out of the blood, the cells just do their thing. They grow right back. That's what we imagine would happen if we can get that antibody out. If we add stem cells, those stem cells contain vinculin, so all we're doing is they'll die probably as they're trying to establish themselves. So I don't know that those are going to be easy answers. And we can't force the cells to repopulate even with a growth factor because vinculin is being antagonized and they're constantly being attacked. So what we need to do is stop the attack, and that's the main way to treat it. I promise.
I was interested in treatments that you're using at Cedars, and with regards to, I assume rifaximin is still the main treatment, and if there's methanogens, rifaximin and neomycin?
Correct.
And can you explain why you were saying, and maybe you mentioned this, why rifaximin does not affect the colon?
So, 3 questions. So we use rifaximin for the hydrogen producers, and we get about 70% response rates. If they have methane, we give rifaximin plus neomycin because we showed that rifaximin is hardly effective, and neomycin is hardly effective, but in culture and in the real life, combining those two is very effective. And then the third question is why rifaximin isn't absorbed or it doesn't affect the colon bacteria.
It doesn't affect the colon bacteria.
So rifaximin, the reason it's not absorbed is it doesn't dissolve in water. It's hydrophobic, and so bile salts will solubilize it in the small bowel, but once the bile gets absorbed by the ileum, there's nothing left. It crystallizes when it's in the colon. So it becomes inactive, which is perfect.
So using it chronically for patients that it's helpful for, like I have a scleroderma patient who's always just high hydrogen, she could be on it.
I have scleroderma patients where we can keep them out of the hospital because they don't come in with pseudo-obstruction and the distension just by being on chronic rifaximin.
So the 550 TID or BID?
So it would depend. I mean, I have patients where I'll give them 10 days of 550 and then 1 a day after that, just as maintenance, once I get them in remission, especially for scleroderma because they're very sick, or they can be.
And do you use partially hydrolyzed orgum? There were some studies with rifaximin working better.
Well, that's feeding the bacteria, right? That's the
for
whole
it to-
principle. Yeah, it gets them all excited and they grow. And I will tell you one thing about scleroderma, though, and this is published, and I can't talk about it on this thing, is that scleroderma is the only disease besides IBS where the antivinculin is high. And scleroderma starts with lack of migrating motor complex, paralysis of the stomach, and it's the highest antivinculins that we see. So that's a really novel connection, and we have more data on that. That I can't talk about.
And LDN, are you guys using LDN as a?
One of our guys, and my colleague, uses LDN some, but it's a prokinetic, and so I know that Lenny Weinstock from St. Louis has been a very big proponent. There's a lot of people who are proponents of low-dose naltrexone, and I think it's effective. But what I see is that it's effective. I don't use a lot of it because I have different style.
And you use low dosages of certain antibiotics, and I heard that you're experimenting with using a low dosage of a statin also as a prokinetic.
So the statin is very interesting. So the fungus Aspergillus was where lovastatin came from. Lovastatin is one of the first cholesterol medications. I can tell you for sure, Aspergillus in a swamp did not make lovastatin to treat your cholesterol. It made it to antagonize the organisms that it was competing with in its environment. And lovastatin binds perfectly to the enzyme that produces methane in methanogens. And when we put lovastatin, and it doesn't work with the new statins because they've all been humanized, destroyed, and altered to make cholesterol better. It only works with lovastatin, and it binds there and blocks methane synthesis. So methane gone, constipation gone. We've done the first trial, which worked, and we're moving into phase 3 in June.
I wonder if red yeast rice would be even more effective because it's less humanized than lovastatin is.
So the constipation predominant IBS is what you're saying?
Constipation, yeah, with
so
methane.
lovastatin, yeah, with methane.
The problem with lovastatin is it's designed to get absorbed. And as soon as it hits the stomach acid, it converts to hydroxy acid and gets absorbed, even the natural form. And so the new product that's coming through phase 3 is delivery system, so it's gradually releasing it all the way through the intestine, and it doesn't get into your bloodstream, kind of like rifaximin.
Is there, in your experience, are there other syndromes or disease states like scleroderma that put you at a higher relative risk for IBS, like it makes connective tissue disorder or something, anything
Well,
like that?
scleroderma is like IBS on steroids and super extreme, you know. So there's no other, like fibromyalgia can have IBS. It's a heavy overlap there. Those are the two main ones. Interstitial cystitis is commonly associated with IBS. Restless leg syndrome. Yeah. But those are questions.
What do you think is the mechanism by which restless leg syndrome has to do with SIBO or IBS?
Don't know. I mean,
Could it
we
have to
see
do
all
with
sorts.
the iron deficiency that sometimes
It could
results?
be iron deficiency. It could be other, small molecules, or it could be bacterial toxins from all the bacteria. We know that, for example, patients are foggy who have overgrowth because they get kind of a little encephalopathic, although not like liver disease. And when you get rid of the overgrowth, they feel so much better. So a lot of different neuromuscular things that I don't quite understand. And restless leg is not easily understood, but it does get better.
So are there cases of patients who have restless leg who don't have any symptoms of SIBO and who then get treated for SIBO and the restless legs resolves?
Yeah, I haven't seen that.
Okay.
That's a.
So IBS, mostly diarrhea, antibiotic-associated diarrhea. Is there any overlap there? Like, is one causing? Is there any kind of association or causation there?
So we don't know all the antibiotic-associated diarrheal causes, but like, for example, if you're taking an antibiotic for food poisoning, you're more likely to get IBS, not because of the antibiotic, but because you were sick enough that you needed the antibiotic. But yeah, I don't know otherwise. I mean, whether it's related to IBS or not. The other thing is, remember that the first day of diarrhea, some people say, well, I don't think food poisoning caused it. I said, well, you're coming here with diarrhea. What was the first day? Was that food poisoning? Well, I don't remember. So you can't tell whether day 1 of diarrhea was food poisoning or not and whether it's associated with antibiotics or not, and whether the antibiotics cleaned out the good bacteria so that pathogens could easily get in. We don't know all the answers to those things, but it's a good point. I just don't have the answer.
Some people are calling post-infectious IBS as primary IBS. What do you think about that terminology?
Let me flip it a little bit, and I would say, number one, would you like to be called irritable? And number two, would you like to be called a syndrome? Because a syndrome is not a disease. So how negative are we to these patients by calling them IBS at all? An irritable, a bowel, and a syndrome in one terminology. And patients hate the term. First of all, it's a wastebasket. It's been a wastebasket diagnosis. We can't figure you out, so you're IBS. And then, you add that terminology to it, and I think it's stupid. I think we should change the name entirely, but it's not up to just me. It requires a consensus.
So what would the name be? Would it be SIBO?
If I were to have my way, and I won't, but I would say it's an autoimmune enteropathy. It's a dysfunction of the gut caused by an autoimmune situation.
So if you think about the rise of autoimmune diseases, which are really on the rise right now, we've seen a big increase. If you add IBS to the other autoimmune diseases, wow, that really increases the number of people with autoimmune diseases.
What percentage of just diarrheal illnesses is SIBO?
Chronic diarrheal illnesses that are colonoscopy negative, I would say 60%.
60.
Yeah.
So more than 2 weeks diarrhea. It's not a known bacterial infectious cause.
Yeah, I would say
even
if
with
it's
those,
longer than 2 weeks. 2 weeks, you can't tell if it's infectious still, because it could be Giardia, it could be other things.
could be viral.
Yeah, viral.
So more than 2 weeks, 60% or more.
Yeah. It's chronic.
Can you repeat what you did? Did you say
If you have chronic diarrhea, of the chronic diarrhea patients that don't, that have a negative workup, 60% have SIBO. That's been proven.
What about the ones that have positive workup, like that have bacteria, that their stool cultures do grow out something? Could they still have SIBO?
Well, if something grows out, it could be post-infectious SIBO. Of the patients with Crohn's disease, a portion of those have SIBO because IBS occurs in every population. So, 10% of lupus patients have SIBO, 10% of Crohn's patients have SIBO, 10% of the entire population, or 20% even.
So of the people that are like for example, the C. diff people that you treat and they have continued to have diarrhea, do you just assume, you just assume they have
do a
SIBO?
breath test because it's complicated with them because you don't know.
If it
right?
could be a
So
recurrence.
Get something objective that you can hang
Breath
your hat
test.
on.
Right.
That would be important.
I was surprised a number of years ago when I had some Giardia patients who developed lactose intolerance after, and I never was very satisfied with the research or the articles I read. I wondered if you notice you think it's the same thing, it's that the Giardia, the people who have these syndromes after the fact, that the Giardia is gone,
Right.
that they have different, these gut symptoms.
Yeah, Giardia is interesting because it doesn't have the CDTB toxin, but there are case series where IBS could develop. So I don't understand that. But whether they get lactose intolerance or not, that can happen after infections where you can lose the enzyme. And again, I don't think anybody knows. I think you're right. The literature is not clear on that. We don't have a lot of Giardia in California, but we do near the lakes, like Castaic up in Ventura, not Ventura, in Valencia area.
People travel, a lot of patients travel.
Yeah. So, Giardia is not that uncommon, but it's not well studied here in the U.S.
Do you think that the Giardia can actually go into the pancreas? Do you think the infection actually can get into the pancreas, or just the inflammation, or just who knows? 'Cause I always
Who
wonder.
knows? Because it's not been studied well.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
I
Here
missed
and
the
then there.
beginning of the talk tonight, so forgive me if you already mentioned this, but there's nobody mentioned anything about the emotional state of these patients with IBS. Are we ruling that out, or is that really?
So, no matter what disease it is, the emotional state of the patient is critical. There are women who come to my office who are constipated, and you learn that sexual abuse is in their past, and that needs to be dealt with. That's huge. It's a traumatic event that needs to be properly handled by the proper medical personnel. So, You can never negate something that's going on that's in the background, and I would never do that. However, to say that stress is the cause of IBS is now wrong. And let me give you the study that proves that. So, and I'll give you two studies because my colleague who did the second study is coming from Australia to a conference with us next week. They studied the U.S. military deployment to Iraq and Afghanistan. The doctor that did that research, now we work together, but everybody that went to Iraq and Afghanistan had intake questionnaires. They all had outtake questionnaires when they returned from deployment, and everything they did there was tracked, including all the illnesses they developed. They looked at if they shot a weapon, if they were shot at, if they were in active combat or they were at a desk job, if they witnessed human death. That was all captured in these documents. And those are stressful events. None of those predicted the development of IBS. And they did get IBS from deployment. The only factor in that study that predicted the development of IBS was whether they got food poisoning when they were in Iraq or Afghanistan. So what that study proved once and for all is that you can be in the most extreme stress situations, but food poisoning still wins the day for IBS. Having said that, to answer your real question, we now know that IBS causes anxiety because Nick Talley from Australia showed that, yes, IBS patients are anxious and do have psychological changes, but it's because of their... Now think about IBS for a second. Crohn's disease, you get 6 bowel movements a day, diarrhea. What's going to happen tomorrow? 6 bowel movements a day. What's going to happen the next day? 6 bowel movements a day. Okay, so I can work with that. I know when it's going to happen. I can work my day. IBS patients with diarrhea, it's unpredictable. You wake up in the morning, you don't have a bowel movement, you're going, oh shoot, what's going to happen? You're in the middle of a meeting, you're in the middle of a session like this, and you got to go have diarrhea after eating. It's miserable. It creates immense anxiety on a date. If you spend 45 minutes in the bathroom after eating on that date, how does that look? You know, these people are traumatized by their illness. So, yes, there is psychology.
Right,
That's
so
the
it's on both ends.
It's
but
on
you're
both
saying
ends.
It's more the after.
Correct. Yeah. Sorry, there was a question.
Just a good,
Oh, sorry.
just to comment on the stress thing,
Yeah.
because you used the analogy earlier, you were being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, I think you said?
Yep.
That would not be the time to take a bowel movement, right? And I agree. But there's a fight or flight response, right? So there's a stress response that inhibits the bowels from having a bowel movement, and then sometimes it's the opposite, right? And you see that made in comedy, movies when there's a situation where they're being held at gunpoint and they have a bowel release or something, right? And then you've got, you don't see actors on stage when they're nervous and stressed because they're in front of thousands of people. They're not getting the hiccups, they're not sneezing, they're not having these involuntary movements in a stressful situation.
Right. Or
and then,
sitting in front of Congress in a congressional hearing for 6 hours like Hillary
Yeah.
Clinton did. She didn't have to get up and go to the bathroom. So that's chronic stress. I mean, I shouldn't use Hillary Clinton, but or politicians at all these days.
but the military.
I'm Canadian, so
study,
you know where I'm leaning.
But the military study, that's really interesting, and it is, I think, probably the ultimate stress. Like working with veterans, I can say it's a real thing, and it reverberates for years later. But those are also people that were trained to handle stress arguably better than most people that exist. So there's all these things that come up that kind of convolute this evidence
For
that
sure.
stress is not a factor here. So
Well, I think a 30,000 military study, 30,000 person military study
it's great.
proves at least chronic stress isn't the major factor for it. And again,
Yeah.
different people handle it differently. Maybe people who go in the military want that, they're, X Games type people. They want to run around with guns and, I don't know. I mean,
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
they handle stress differently. I'm being very sarcastic, but I'm just saying,
No,
you
I
could make
get
those
it.
kinds of arguments that the people who are in voluntary service in the military are different. But it's a pretty powerful study, I think. So that
No, absolutely. But I'm saying, I'm asking, does it feel comfortable with certainty to say that stress is not a causing factor of IBS or SIBO.
I think
I think you just did.
stress, yeah, exactly, and it affects different people differently. And, you know, I mean, but what I'll say about the military is that these folks who go and come back now have IBS for the rest of their lives after, you know, doing the heroic
After the
thing for
storm.
our country. And I'm Canadian, I'm still calling this our country because it really did some amazing and very challenging things. They get denied VA benefits even though IBS qualifies you for VA benefits, and it's proven that deployment causes IBS from this. So I know a lot of these folks who come to my clinic and they just have a tough time.
Yeah.
You're next.
Okay, I'll give you a case history. My mother is going to be 91 years old, God willing, in April, okay, and she had a diagnosis of IBS when she was in her mid-40s. It's been a long time. She was told, Lillian, you've got the Jewish woman syndrome. And not only she's got double whammy, she's Jewish and she's a woman. Okay, she was given every tranquilizer, Valium, you know, Librium, whatever they gave back in those days. She's never had the diarrhea. She'd love to have diarrhea every now and then. It's constipation. Abdominal, you know, bloating, gas, spasms, abdominal pain, really, from the spasms. So this went on for years. Now, stress, yeah, I mean, Mona is a 2-time cancer survivor, and she's outlived 2 husbands and a boyfriend. But
Which came first, the husbands or the boys?
So I'm going to see her next week. That's why I'm bringing this up. I'm going to see her. So about a few years ago, when I was doing my fellowship at anti-aging medicine, I gave her the book. I said, read this book, Mom. It's the Gluten Connection by Sherry Lieberman. It spoke to her. I figured no way she could change her diet at this age. She's 86 then. It spoke to her that she went gluten-free, okay, and her symptoms dramatically improved by just with that alone, maybe about 67%. Then she eventually got off it a little bit because she was into Israel with my brother, and you know they don't have gluten-free foods there. And then this got worse, so I had her work with. She finally, about several months ago, she went gluten-free and dairy-free, which is a big step. And she is better, but there's certain fiber foods. She hasn't gone on the food map diet and stuff like that. And I don't, you know, here's the thing. We're a really special population of doctors here. You know, I'm going to visit her in Florida. I don't know who does functional medicine there. And her age, I mean, I don't want to disturb the waters. She's really very, very incredible at her age. She lives alone. So, I mean, how do you work with someone, you know, what do you do in that situation? And how do you find functional doctors in GI? I mean, where I am, there's none. They don't exist.
It's hard in Florida.
You're the
I
first
know.
person I've met.
It's hard in Florida. There's not a lot of functional GI doctors in Florida. Which city?
Pardon me?
Where does she live?
West Palm Beach.
West Palm Beach. There's
Is she
one in
function-
University of Miami. Her name is Dr. Mosheri. She does
I'm gonna name
functional.
Maybe my sister will drive. I'll drive her.
The-
Thanks.
Have you ever exclusively used prokinetic agent as the primary treatment, not other antibiotics, et cetera, and if so, what kind of systems?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Question?
So I will. Yeah. So have you ever used just the prokinetic? Just turn the lights up. And the answer is yes. But it's about 20% chance of getting rid of it, and it takes about 2 to 3 months. So it works, but it just forcing the motility, it takes time. They're hanging on, they're hanging on, they're hanging on. So it does work.
Is there any research that you're aware of about Wi-Fi and cell phones and the increase in IBS?
Which one?
Wi-Fi and cell phones?
Yeah, I don't know.
That, I'm waiting for that, because I think that's the #1 problem across the board for everybody.
I can tell you my stress level goes up with these stupid things.
Well, it pulls all your nutrients out of your body, and it just, you know, it makes the person's body like have ADD.
So it's been buzzing in my pocket for the whole hour. It has been, honestly. I don't know who's doing it, but they're going to pay for it when I get out of here.
Can I go back to the question about stress? That one of the things that occurs to me is that if with everything that's going on with these people, the inability to adapt, obviously, and winding up with food poisoning may have something to do with the person's response to stress, how much of it is starting with the way it affects their brain, and then winds up affecting their gut. So it's very complicated to track that, but I mean, if some people wind up with food poisoning and others not, some people will eat the same food and some will get it and others won't. The question is it stress and lack of adaptability? How does that relate to the gut bacteria? It's really complicated, but
It's very complicated. Stress can reduce the migrating motor complexes, which is kind of speaks to a question earlier, is that having stress puts you in the fight or flight. Everything shuts down during fight or flight, which is what it's supposed to do. So maybe doing that all the time isn't good, and maybe that brings the overgrowth back or makes food poisoning more likely to affect you. And yeah, so there's a lot of intertwined things there, and I agree.
So they don't, somebody who doesn't have access to functional medicine testing like the breath test, or they can't afford it, or they don't have access or can't afford the elemental diet packets or whatever, what would you do? If you think they have SIBO?
I mean, if they have insurance, I would try rifaximin, because being covered by most insurances now. I think the insurances have figured out it saves money if you take rifaximin.
Okay.
Can you talk about NSAIDs and IBS?
Like Motrin. So NSAIDs can promote inflammation in the gut, and that's bad for the gut. So we've seen patients where it triggers microscopic colitis and diarrhea, and you got to stop that. So yeah, it can make it worse for sure. I agree. How long do you want to go? 8:30.
I think we're pretty much done.
What's the course of rifaximin? 2 weeks to a month? What do you do?
It's only 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
14 days.
Okay, excellent. All right, thank you so much.